Hi everyone. For those of you who know me, hi. For those of you who don't, my name is Nilesh. I'm a software engineer here at One2N, and I want to start off today's session by talking about a topic that has been quite close to my interest for the last 2 to 3 months, and that is pairing with Cursor. And I want to explore how Cursor has helped me adopt extreme programming practices in the age of AI. Right. So before I actually get started with my session itself, uh, I want to talk about a little bit about myself. Like I mentioned, I have 3 years of software development experience. My main areas of interest are backend engineering and databases. And outside of work, on weekends, if there is no F1 race, I'm usually reading up a thriller mystery or a novel by Dan Brown. Besides that, at my current workplace, I work with clients all across the world, across Dubai, across Middle East, and across Singapore as well. And at most of my clients, I I try and force my team to adopt pair programming agile practices. So before I get started here, can someone give me a show of hands of how many people are actually developers here and how many are not developers? Can people who are developers raise their hands? Awesome, right? And how many of you have actually heard of extreme programming? Right. Awesome. So for those of you who don't know, extreme programming was a term coined by Kent Beck, who's one of the pioneers of the agile software development process, which has become overly popular today. And he coined this term sometime back in the 1990s, to be 1998 to be precise. And it got very popular in the beginning, but over time, all of these terms got lost due to software tooling and due to new practices and due to startups wanting to scale fast and stuff like that, right? And but recently, all of these terms have started to come into practice all over again. And besides extreme programming, yeah, besides extreme programming, I also want to talk about what principles and what practices that extreme programming encourages us to do, and how we can actually leverage this and integrate with an AI editor like Cursor, right? So to talk about what are the values of extreme programming, there are basically 5 simple values. And these are extremely pragmatic. You don't have to be a developer to understand this, right? These are communication, which usually relates with pair programming. Extreme programming genuinely encourages you to sit together with a teammate and pair program with them. And it also emphasizes on something called simplicity, where the concept tells you to only do what is required at that time to focus on one specific concept and only then move on to the next one. Feedback here means that you are constantly pushing software to your client or to your customer and getting feedback so that you can improve upon continuously. And courage here means that you're asking yourself that if you want to refactor the software continuously or not based on your business requirements. Respect again is a pragmatic term that has nothing to do with the software development practice over here. So a lot of what I mentioned here has stuff to do with pushing fast, pushing continuously, getting feedback, writing tests and stuff, right? So again, before I move on, I would like to ask people, how many of you actually write tests for the software that you develop, right? And how many of you actually write tests before a concept which is called test-driven development, right? Very controversial. I don't want to bring that up. People have very strong opinions about it, right?
I don't write tests when I wipe.
Right. So, yeah, that is what my session today is about and why you should do it, right? Right. Um, so I have become a strong proponent of extreme engineering over the past few months because I've seen the benefits of it, and it's become very quick to integrate these practices in AI in the age of AI, right? And like I mentioned, how you implement these concepts is basically you practice pair programming with your colleagues. You write tests first, and you keep refactoring your code. You always follow the right design patterns. You always abstract out methods that are repeating and stuff like that. And also, you keep pushing your software via some continuous integration or some GitOps methodology so that you can get feedback from your customer immediately, right? And today I want to try and showcase via a very small demo on how I'm able to pick up these practices quickly and why you should also practice them, right? So before I show the demo, I also want to mention that I started using Cursor sometime back last year, so say June 2024. And when I was given access to this first time, obviously I created multiple accounts so that I didn't have to pay a $20 fee. But then I realized I ran out of email accounts. So what my experience was that it was giving someone an F1 car who only knows how to ride a cycle, right? I was kind of the guy who used to make small comments. I used to try and understand each line of code. I used to go read the documentation. I used to go read Stack Overflow threads. I used to try and Google search and stuff like that. And then suddenly, when I got access to Cursor for the first time, it started auto-completing stuff for me. I never used the composer until then. I hadn't understood what were agents. I didn't understand what was the power of CLI and stuff. So the fact that code was auto-completing for me itself was mind-blowing. And for the first 2-3 months, I was like, wow, this is cool. And I genuinely felt more productive. But as I started working on more larger code bases, more enterprise code based stuff like that, it started to feel limiting because it couldn't predict the business logic that I was supposed to write. And I did not have a understanding of these practices back then. I did not write tests back then. I did not understand what my code should do in production. I could not think the long-term view of my code should do. I couldn't understand what infra layer and stuff like that was. So that is when, and also at the same time I started getting active on Twitter, and I saw people doing just one-shot prompting and just building a complete full stack app, right? People were like, hey, I just want to build a CRUD app for task management, and it gave out a beautiful front end and back end. I did try that. It didn't really work out because the one-shot prompting either did too much for me or did too little for me. Either it made it so aesthetic that it could go and become a Figma design on its own, or it gave me such little content that I couldn't actually build an MVP out of this. And so I was stuck in the middle. And for a couple of months, I just shut down Cursor. I stopped my subscription, and I just got back to what I was doing before I started using Cursor. But then after getting on board to a new client, I realized that a lot of my time was spent writing boilerplate code, setting up processes, setting up pipelines, setting up test annotations and stuff like that. And I realized I could outsource some of this, or not outsource. I could uh, teach someone this once and help, and they could help me speed up this process. And so I took another punt at Cursor then. And by that time, I also had a fair understanding of XP, right? And I could do XP even without Cursor, but then I realized that instead of doing pair programming with a colleague of mine, I should try and do pair programming with a AI editor, where I could be the driver and AI could be the navigator. And the results I saw were amazing. So what I realized was that AI was able to work 24/7, whereas I could not. And there were cases, not again in my enterprise apps, but my personal projects where I used to give a large prompt sometime in the night before I go to sleep. And then it used to probably finish probably in 1 hour. But I used to wake up in the morning and there used to be a really nice app ready for me with all these concepts. And so I will try and build a very small app today where I'm going to try and showcase how these XP practices have helped me, right? And I also hope that some of you can take away on how you can integrate these practices and become a Cursor power user next time you come back, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to build a very simple CRUD app, right? I'm going to build a CRUD app backed by SQLite database. I don't want to get into Postgres and MySQL, set up a server and stuff. So I'm just going to use an in-memory SQLite database, right? And I'm just going to write a simple CRUD API where you can do create, retrieve, update, delete. And I'm going to write this in Python. And I'm going to do this in Python because I've noticed that LLMs or even general code editors, they are very friendly towards languages that are used extremely commonly. So if you take some obscure language, something like a Scala or something like a Rust that doesn't have a lot of adoption, that doesn't have a lot of good code for the AI to learn from on GitHub or any open source repository, it doesn't perform very well. And the most commonly used languages, if you go to GitHub, you'll see that JavaScript has the largest number of repositories, Python is second and stuff like that, right? So that is why I'm going to try and build this in Python. Another disclaimer is that I have not coded in Python since the past 1.5 years. But the fact that I am going to try and prompt AI, I'm going to try and prompt it via these practices, and hopefully it gives me a good result is what I'm going to try and aim for. So very simply, what I'm going to do right now is, 1 second, I'm going to start a new app. बड़ा करूं?
Is the font visible to everyone at the back? Yes.
Okay. Right? So very simply, now obviously, you probably cannot build an app via these XP practices if you're not a developer, right? So this session is going to be slightly geared towards developers, and you need some level of base knowledge to even get up to speed with this. The first thing I usually do when I create a Python projects, I usually initialize a virtual environment. I'm going to try and अच्छा एक second. एक second.
Is that cursor or
No, that's VS Code only.
that's what he said. Then just do command plus Python.
Okay.
VS Code.
हाँ ठीक है.
Is this visible from the back? Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It's going to initialize my virtual environment very simply, right? And like I mentioned, I want to try and build this in Fast API and Pydantic. But for now, I'm not going to mention any requirements or stuff like that. I'm just going to create a sample scaffold. I'm going to initialize my repository with a Git. And one very important principle of extreme programming is that you commit early and you commit often. And why you want to do that is so that you can push code continuously, get feedback continuously, and move faster, right? So this is the first thing I usually do. And after that, I'm just going to create a very simple scaffold for now. I'm going to create a bunch of folders, and I'm going to create a test folder. I'm going to create a requirements.txt for myself so that I can know where to put my packages. I'm going to create a git ignore. So I know I can ignore my .env because I don't want that pushed, right? And if I just check, cool. So I've created a very simple scaffold. And what I want to do here now is, like I mentioned, create a task-read API. But before I even start writing a single line of code, I want to set up some rules for my editor. So for people who have written some code in Python, you'll know there are some fundamentals that you have to follow. You would probably want to have type hints. If you are writing APIs, you want to ensure that your APIs are RESTful. And if you are writing if you're writing or doing a large project, you probably want to follow the convention of a handler, a repository, a service, etc. Right? So, but I want this to be followed throughout the process of my development. I just don't want to be followed in this first prompt, right? So, if there is a certain rule that you want to follow throughout your development, Cursor provides something called cursor rules. And now there is a V1 of the cursor rules or something called a V2 of the cursor rules. I haven't explored the V2 entirely, but I do know for a fact that in V2 you can create a cursor directly, and I think it can stay hidden. I think it's cursor/rules or something. And inside this, you can create markdown files where you can create separate rules for your backend, for your front end, for your DevOps, for your infra, for your Git commits, etc., etc. I haven't explored this V2 version lately because I think it's come out recently. I stick to something called a V1 version where you just create a very simple file. And all that file will do for you, so you just have to create .cursor rules, I believe. Right? Is it .cursor rules?
Yeah.
Is it correct?
You can prompt for this. I mean, you can ask it to create.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And now this is something where now you can do two things, right? Either you can just tell cursor rules to, hey, can you fill in best practice for a Python fast API project? Or you can actually write your opinions over here. Now, since I have some strong opinions, which I loosely held, I would like to have a certain predefined template that I put into my cursor rules, right? For instance, only use Python 3.11, only use type hints while writing methods. When you're starting a server, ensure that it runs on a certain port, etc., right? And so I have some predefined prompts for myself. So all I'm going to do is just have these prompts, right?
There's also one thing called as cursor to directory where you can download all the
Okay.
best practices from.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So if you are a newbie to a certain language or to a certain framework, there is a very popular GitHub repo called Awesome Cursor Rules, and there's also something called Cursor Directory. I think Cursor Directory is maintained by the engineers at Cursor itself, where you can also contribute any certain cursor rule that you found useful, and that will be helpful to the community. So if you just go to Cursor Directory, you can check out, and you can filter by language, you can filter by framework, you also have MCP stuff, right? This is something that I keep it very short and concise. This has come from my limited experience. So again, with what I've also noticed in my large scale projects that, let us say you do a one shot prompting and it gives you a beautiful app, right? Now on top of that, you want to add a small feature, and when you do a single shot prompting, it doesn't usually create tests unless you've explicitly told it to. Now, what happens when you start to incrementally build on that app, right? You will eventually go and break some part of the app which you don't know how to fix. And so, what I usually practice now is I do try to test event development, which is one of the practice of XP, right? And so, I've clearly mentioned that, hey, before you even start writing any code, let's just write some tests. And what I have mentioned in my global rules, right? Like, always write tests before you do any implementation. Use PyTest as your framework, and if there are any external dependency, you try and mock them. In this case, I don't have an external dependency because I'll be using SQLite, right? And I have followed the convention of using model services and using HTTP, appropriate HTTP status codes, right? So these are the rules that I've set up. Now I'm going to try and prompt it to build what I actually wanted to. In this case, like I mentioned, I want to build a task management CRUD app, right? And what I'm going to do for that is very simple. I know for a fact that I want to build a task CRUD app. And right? And I have mentioned, see, I just want to do a CRUD API. I want just 3 fields on my task. I want title, description, priority. And I also want to, before I start writing any code, I want you to write the test. Again, I'm not writing any business logic for this. I'm just saying, hey, after doing all this, just put all of this in a test directory, right? And I'm going to put it. So unless this crashes, it should work.
Oh, what should you do while Cursor is writing code?
You write next set of prompts.
How many of you use Cursor CLI, which just launched recently? Has anyone tried that? Oh. So I want to talk about food. What's your experience?
I mean, I don't use Cursor CLI, but yeah, Cloud Code or what.
Okay.
Cloud Code is the best.
But recently there have been.
You don't have to take that day. Take a Cursor right now. No, just kidding.
Today you can actually bash it because recently there have been a lot of bugs.
I know, but yeah, I think they just launched. These days are still in, not GA right now.
No, they're not in GA.
But
There
I
were
want
a lot of
to
model regressions because they were using the wrong fonts.
2-3 errors were there.
By the way, do you have any preference for model? Always auto.
So for that, what I've seen that when you're using auto, right, or Cursor gives you unlimited auto-complete and unlimited prompts. But one of the best practices I personally follow is that whenever I'm planning a task out, that time I use an Opus or a GPT-5 High. And after that, for execution, we can use auto because it's same.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then they actually released their own dev tool recently that they trained to identify the right devs. The tool calling becomes easier for them.
There's now some stealth model as well that they're piloting.
Code Supernova.
Is it good?
I don't know.
That's a very touchy topic. Is the model good?
Currently,
Yeah, that's
I think
also
it's
true.
Grok, the new release of the Grok, that is it.
Yeah, they
Most probably.
say Grok for code, but
Just like GPT-5 was there.
yeah.
Fast, I'm not wrong.
What?
It's Grok for fast, right?
No,
But
that's
code
already
fast. Yeah.
Grok for fast is still slow.
But when you change model now, the style of prompts from AI that also changes. So you have to be convenient. So the thinking pattern also changes a little
So
bit.
I have done a hack there.
Mm.
What I've done is that I have created my own set of prompts
Okay.
that I can take and I format everything into XML and Markdown.
Okay.
So when you're using thinking models, you use XML deeper. So it makes it easier. And when you're going for let's say Sonnet or something similar, non-thinking, you go after native Markdown.
Yeah, let's go back.
So what is done right now is that it's written my test very nicely. Obviously, I'm reviewing it. One very basic tip is that never accept code without reviewing, especially AI-generated code. And it looks okay to me right now. Also, I'm not reviewing this very deeply because it's test code, not exactly business logic. So at the moment, it looks okay. But what I found very interesting here is that even though I just told it to implement tests, it went the extra mile, wrote my requirements.txt as well. I think it's populated it with Fast API UVCon, which is a server to start Fast API applications, and Pydantic, which is used to write Python models as well. And it's tried and installed it, it's got into some dependency issue, and it's trying to fix that. And also, it's written tests nicely. but it's gone slightly overboard because I think it has written test cases which I would have probably never thought of. For example, over here, it has a separate class called test HKs itself, and it is using very long titles, which would have been very tedious for me to write. It probably has something with special characters, again very tedious for me to write. Now these are things where you should really use AI as your clutch, and you should let it be the navigator, because you will probably think of the most basic happy path, which the customer will use 99% of the times. But the 1% of the time that something crashes, it's going to be one of these test cases, right? And it's also put in some concurrent test cases where it checks for thread safety and stuff, which is cool. But it's gotten very slow. But let me see what's happening over here. I'm gonna cancel this. It's going to init.py. Okay, so it's created a bunch of init.py files for me. It's created a test file for me. Okay, it already created my task file also, even though I never asked it to. I guess it figured from the fact that from my API model, it figured what it wants on the model, right? And it created an enum, which is what I wanted. I didn't want a data class, which is okay, but I'll try and prompt it to not use data classes and stuff. And this is where we'll get to the refactoring part, right? Okay, task. Okay, already went and created service also. Okay. Now, see, this is a classic case where I went overboard, right? And I didn't want it to go so far. So what I'm going to try and do is that I'm going to just accept the test file for now. I'm going to try and reject the other files because I don't want it to go overboard at the moment. One second. Oh, it's already made the API also function. Okay. So I think I'm going to undo here. This I'm going to keep. This I'm going to undo. Right. Okay, readme is fine, right? And if I look at what it has generated for me right now, it's generated a source, and in that I just have PyCache, which is okay. And in test, just right. It has only one file, so I'm only generated a test for now. Now, very importantly, what I do at this moment is that you always commit your changes, right? And because you want to commit early and you want to commit often, and Cursor has this really cool AI committer also, where it generates commit messages for you. And again, so until now I've not even typed a single word, and it's already done probably 10% of my effort for me, right? So I just want to get started by committing my requirements, my readme, and my test. And all you have to do is just press this button, and hopefully it will generate a nice descriptive commit message for me, right? Which is very cool. And I'm just going to commit it, right? So an advantage of this is that you can just revert anytime if you felt that you've gotten too deep into a loop and you want to get back to the last stable version, you can commit it. There's also a restore checkpoint here in Cursor where this button lets you restore to a certain prompt. I am not a fan of it because sometimes there are certain parts of a prompt that you want to keep and certain prompts you do not want to. And that's why I prefer the old fashioned way of just committing the stuff which I want to, right? So at this point, I've just created the test for myself. I'm going to try and prompt it to create the model here. Again, what I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to do very small specific things. It went overboard here where I tried to create the service model and handler here itself. But I like doing things a little slowly. I wanted to focus on exactly one thing here. Now, what I missed out here was that there's a very cool feature again that's called pre-prompt cursor global rules, right? And what you can do here is in your cursor settings, you can actually go to global rules, which are here, and you can set up these rules here, right? And this will apply to throughout your entire project on any throughout any project on your laptop. And what here I specifically usually do, this is not my work laptop. What I do on my work laptop is that I usually tell it that give me exactly what I asked for, give me exactly the concise messages, don't do what I more than what I asked for, right? So again, this depends on how opinionated you are, and you can give certain prompts that you want to use throughout your project. There are certain rules that you want to use throughout your project,
What's
right?
the optimal size of your user rules and your project rules that you keep? Because one of the things I've observed is a lot of times when you're doing a larger task on a code base, let's say 20,000, 30,000 lines of code, you're going to lead to a lot of context rot due to your project rules, even though they're important because the best models should have 200k tokens of context window. So, what is the ideal size that you are following for your user and project rules?
So project rules again less than 100 lines.
Okay.
And user rules also less than 50 lines. Again, I like to keep it very simple. I don't go very opinionated because, like I said, on my work projects, again, I'm working with a team of developers, so I cannot enforce some of my opinions on them. So I try and keep it very generic, very simple, and things that almost every developer agrees with on my user rules.
So in Cursor there's also settings to always attach your cursor rules when always attach cursor rules, auto detect cursor rules. So do you always attach or do you keep it like manual when you tag it or do you keep it automatic?
I always attach when I'm in a project. Yes, that's what I usually do. And yep. Right. So now that I've generated my test, I want to try and generate the actual models. Right. And again, I'm trying to do this very incrementally because I want to move slowly. I want to try and review my code as well at the same time. And I always add my cursor rules. So another concept of extreme programming that I'll come and try and show you here is that after it generates the model, we're probably going to write the API in a stringle main.py file. Now, obviously, that is not very readable code, right? You want your APIs to follow a certain hierarchy. You want to follow maybe an interface pattern, right? And that is when you actually want to try and refactor your code. It is very nice at a first shot. You want to just get it done with. You want to see your tester passing, and you have an MVP ready. But that is not code that is developer friendly. That is probably production ready, but not developer friendly, right? So that is what I want to try and do after this, right? Did it generate? Okay, it generated a nice model for me. I don't know why it's using these complex validators, but okay. It created a nice request body for each of my requests and responses. Created validations also. Okay. Applied updates and stuff. Okay, I think this is okay for now. And it mentioned that my tests are passing as well. But let me just go back. Right. I'm going to try and put everything in one file for now, and then I'm going to try and extract it to refactor. And I want to see how well it refactors it for me. So, and I'm going to use SQLite for now.
What percentage you're almost done with the app here right now?
So I'm done with the test. I'm done with the data model. I just have to implement the handler and show a refactoring demo.
And while you are, so how much of the percentage that you actually end up more from a feature format, or do you actually also brainstorm on the refactoring side of the function that, hey, I think can you iterate on this function? Can we do this better? How much of that percentage that actually goes into?
I don't bother with it usually on small code basis.
Right.
But on larger projects, yes, I will argue with it. I will pair program with it. I will force it to follow a certain design pattern. It might suggest a strategy design pattern. I might want to use a factory design pattern, right? So that is where I usually use it. But besides that, on personal projects, not so much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One thing what is the right way to keep its memory updated? Because at times what happens, you prompted something, the tool said, yeah, I understand, and that's a great suggestion, but again it repeats the same mistake. So on a memory aspect, do you have any suggestions like those rules I understood apart from that?
I believe there's something called rules and memories where you can set.
There's dot context. Just like dot rules, there's dot context as well.
But can you set that globally?
Yeah, and so you can do what's called spec-driven development. So you have a overall spec, and whatever feature or whatever you're trying to develop, you have a micro spec for that. So if all of that goes in the context, it can go wherever because you can load it from wherever. It doesn't matter. And so the overall spec relates to the feature spec, and even within the feature spec, you can have smaller divisions.
And to follow Nilesh's practice that every time you make a change, it works, you commit. What I personally do is whenever I have my spec, I just take the commit messages, make a very small diff of okay, these are the files, this is how the file does, and it keeps adding to the spec. And then on the spec as well, you can maintain a task.
Okay.
So that makes it easier, and that is actually super helpful when you're looking at a large code. You can pinpoint.
So the way we do that is actually a feature spec and an implementation spec. So you can always maintain that. And you can also add a cursor rule which says that whenever you are developing any feature, you first load the feature spec automatically. And after the code is done, you also update the feature spec. So then that kind of circular workflow keeps the context updated.
But doesn't having two specs, right? Like one is a 100-foot view and other is a detailed view.
Yeah.
Does it not lead to some level of over context?
You have to link it. So what I do is that whenever if I have a feature to be done in the main spec, and now I want to work on it, I move it from the main spec and I make a more detailed feature spec out of it.
Got it.
So the main spec only has one line which says that this feature spec is present here,
It's
and
more
all
of
this
a,
information
it's
can
more
go
of an
inside
index
the-
file, index for the.
It is an index.
Yeah.
And then you can also create a symlinks and similar, right? So it's automatically
Sky's the limit. You can do.
HD
Exactly.
But that
It's
doesn't
called
get
a context
committed
tree.
later. What you were saying about rules with it.
Yep. So what it did now is that it just dumped all of my code in a single main.py file, 435 lines, absolutely not readable. But when it tried to run the test, it ran successfully, right? So now my app is ready to be delivered to the customer, but not really easy to collaborate on. If a new developer tomorrow joins my team, it's going to be very hard for him to read. So this is where I try and refactor my code, right? Because now I know for a fact that, hey, I have a working model, I've committed it. So if something goes wrong, I just have to revert and push and I'll be sorted, right? So I know for a fact that I'm not going to exceed my deadlines for now. So I'm going to try and just refactor this main.py file, and I'm going to just tell it to follow a certain service repository handler pattern. Now, all of this stems from obviously experience, but the fact that all of these principles are basically extreme programming principles, where you write your tests first, where you refactor regularly, where I committed regularly, where if I had set up a server, I would also be pushing regularly, and I'd be delivering to a customer. And I'm going to try and again refactor this and ensure all my tests pass, right? So if once I do that, I'm also going to right? I'm going to try and just refactor this and wait for it. And once it does this, I'm just going to ask it to verify my test. And if test pass, I know for a fact that it has done a good job for me. And all of this without me writing a single line of code in a language that I've not worked on for the last 1 year, in a framework that I'm not very comfortable with. So it helps you hit the ground running is what I'm trying to tell you. And when combined with good software engineering practices that are extendable across any language, across any framework in the world, you get a very powerful combination. What's the point I'm trying to make today.
So cursor allows us to send the prompt in between, like the output is going on, you can still send the prompt, right?
Yeah, you can queue your
queue,
prompts.
it,
Yeah,
it,
but it also allows to send it even if you queue.
huh.
There is a push button.
Yeah, your
So
text is not disabled, text box is not disabled.
yeah. So
But
how much?
I've seen that queuing is actually a very inefficient way of working. But again, this is bias.
I second that. I know.
But it's like
Yeah.
you don't know what's going to come out,
Actually,
and you're already. It's like
That's right.
it's a very classic
So
"Alu Raju
sometimes-
Sona Niklega"
Yeah.
analogy.
But sometimes cursor takes another path, and we wanted to
Yeah.
keep it to the right path. So we have
So
to
at
send
times I
option
think it's when you are using thinking model, especially I keep watching thinking model, and at times it makes a blunder. You have to simply stop it, send a prompt, boss गलत जा रहे हो. तो बच्चे से जैसे काम करने वाला है कई बार इश्यूज बाहर निकालना है भूल जाते हैं कई बार.
I like it.
It's a very smart child.
Yeah, it's a very smart child.
It's a very smart.
Right. So when I try to run the test now, again, we're seeing the benefit of writing tests first and then actually executing our code. It showed that 39 of our tests failed. And since I had reviewed my test at the end of the first prompt, I know for a fact that something has gone wrong. And what's great about Cursor is it's self-healing. So it automatically figured out that some tests have failed and it's going to try and fix them on its own. So again, this is really cool.
The only risk a lot of times I've observed with mainly Claude family of models,
Mhm.
less with GPT-5 these days, is that a lot of times the models are really lazy.
Mhm.
They write the tests. One of the times I was trying to generate tests, I follow the same TDD practices. Then I wrote the code, then Opus deleted my tests. And it said that your tests are passing. I'm like, there's no test. How do you make it pass? So reeling it in is also like something that I've sort of realized these days.
You can set permissions like you can't delete
I prefer running it on YOLO mode. Almost all of my tools. I love dangerously. Exactly. I've actually seen that writing tests organically, like yourself, and then building on top of that is actually the best way to go about. Yeah, exactly. Look, so the models are RLFL'd on making the user happy, not being right.
In my case, I think I was writing integration test.
Yeah.
The test was failing. It changed the logic to pass the test.
That is still okay. I was doing incremental changes, so there was a Git command. It tried to delete my Git inventory. So that I couldn't do the URL.
Okay, awesome. So it completed the prompt, it said all my tests passed, but obviously I don't trust it fully, right? So I'm going to just do one last end-to-end test, and I'm not a fan of writing more code to do end-to-end tests. So I'm going to either prompt it via Postman, I'm going to try and run the APIs via Postman, or run via HTTP client. The reason I don't use Postman nowadays is it's become very bloated and I like to stay in the zone in a single editor. So I'm going to just try and create a simple HTTP runner, and there's this cool extension on VS Code or Cursor for that matter. It's called REST client, and it allows you to run requests within your editor itself, right? So just summarizing. Okay, let me just wait for finish. But is my server running? Okay, this is not running. Let me try and start it now. Awesome. So started the server. Let me try and just hit the request. Status is healthy. Okay, this is my info message. Let me just create a task. Created a task. Created a certain priority of a task. Okay, create a low priority task. Okay. I don't know, create more tasks. I want to just get all tasks now. So I created 3 tasks. I got very nicely 4 tasks. It's also creating, the agent also is creating on the side for me. And then let me try and get a certain task. This task detail was not found. Okay, so let me see if there's a, okay, it's using UUID. It's not using integer primary keys over here. And it's running the test for me. Let me update a certain task. Task is not found. Let me get a certain task ID so I can update it. right? I'm going to take this task ID for myself. I'm going to update my task ID here. I'm going to send the request. Okay, it got updated. I'm going to send this again. Okay, this also got updated. Awesome. Let me try and delete and then get that task again so that I know it's been deleted. And again, it went overboard here, implemented endpoints that I didn't even ask it to, and that's because it did not populate my global roles, which I should have done. I should have told it to give me exactly what I wanted. I just wanted CRUD, but it's giving me use APIs which I'll never use again. So let us say I delete a certain task and then hit it. Okay, last 2 minutes, right? I'm going to delete it. I'm going to try and get now. It says detail not found, right? So I've completed a certain CRUD app. I showed you create, retrieve, update, delete, and with test without me writing a single line of code in less than half an hour, right? So that was it. And with following all practices, you can push this to production right now and you will be confident that nothing will break. So that is what I want to try and showcase in today's demo. And just some tips before I sign off, that what are some tips that I have learned while using Cursor over the last 6 to 9 months is that your context is your king. Set up your Cursor rules, set up your global rules, right? Do README driven development, do spec driven development like Rachit mentioned, and add only, and if you see here very nicely, Cursor tells you what portion of your context you've already used and how much of it's pending. So always make sure that you keep the quantity of files very limited. And if you want to implement a separate feature, try and start a new conversation so that you avoid long conversation and it avoids hallucinating. For front end, I would strongly recommend using images. If you like a certain component on a certain website, you can just screenshot it and upload that and write the CSS for you. Commit early, commit often, so that it's very easy to revert. And use AI to write tests, because I've found that's where the most value I found. These edge cases like long, string lengths, special characters, where I found the most value for it. Code is indexed, again, Cursor automatically indexes it for you, but if you have a very large code base, you might have to go and resync it manually multiple times. And this is something which I've seen only recently. So I also work in Golang, and there's been a new introduction in the testing library where you can also do concurrent tests now. But there's been no LLM tool, at least for the last 15 days, that has been able to write tests accommodating for that feature. So keep in mind what are the cutoff dates for each LLM model, because that's very useful, right? So yes. Also, shameless plug. I'm from One2N, and if you enjoyed my talk, we also do a lot of extreme programming practice at work. We are also extremely pragmatic about how we build our software. So, please go to our career page, and if you find a role that fits you, please feel free to apply. Thank you.